welcome to the Booster Pack. This is the show where we unwrap the stories and crack the mysteries of collectible game history. My name is Rance, and today on the show we have a man of eclectic talents. He is a singer, a trumpet player, an award-winning radio personality, a former tabletop game podcaster, a former contributor to magazines like these with reviews and columns, and heck, let's throw in chess master as well. And I haven't even mentioned that he is the designer, a very accomplished one, of instant classics such as Mystery Rummy, the Diamonds game, and of course his hit Baseball Highlights 2045 deck building game. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, didn't you say this is about collectible games? Well, I'm glad you brought that up because we're getting there. Because this guy is also a pioneer in the collectible game space. He brought out one of the first successful CCGs to follow Magic the Gathering, the dragon-centric mythological Wyvern CCG. And as if all that wasn't enough to talk to him about, he had a string of other collectible projects throughout the 90s and early 2000s. And we're going to talk about today. Oh, and just a little spoiler for later. He spent 13 years working on one of the most successful TCG product lines human civilization has ever seen. But we'll get to that soon. Anyway, with all that said and whispered, my guest today, the absolute true connoisseur of the card game, Mike Fitzgerald. Mike, how are you?
I'm good, Rance. It's very nice to be with you. That's quite an introduction. I don't think I've ever had the privilege of having one like that.
So many talents, so many talents. But let's start with the game-centric one. We've only got so much time. So I want to wind back just a bit before all of that, before the trumpet, before the chess master. How did you get into gaming? What was your first experience? And, you know, what brought you to the hobby?
Playing card games with my family when I was very young. I think my father once told me he taught me rummy when I was about 3. And by 6, I was a pretty accomplished cribbage player.
That card game experience would come so in handy for your career as basically known as one of the, you know, most prolific card game designers out there.
Yeah, I did one game only that wasn't a card game, and it didn't do well. So I went right back to card games. Yeah, I mean, I know, you know, I've known them so long. I play all kinds of games now, but if I'm thinking of designing something, cards just speak to me a little bit. So that's what I do.
Well, I could not relate to that more. Definitely the shuffle and the feel of cards in the hand, the surprise of taking something off the deck is the, you know, I don't want to get any hate mail, but the premium way to play games. So you and I are allies in that sense. So just quickly, you played a lot of card games, but a lot of other people who are in the industry as early as you were and interested also played things like war games and RPGs. Was that ever something you took up?
Yeah, in the 50s, I started playing Avalon Hill games. Tactics 2 was an early game of theirs. By late 50s, early 60s. Yeah, I got into the wargaming a little bit. I was starting to play chess then, which took a lot of my time.
Chess is the ultimate war game.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, so I'm trying to, well, Clue was one of the games too my family likes, and I love Clue. So sort of combining Clue and Rummy, I don't know. There's something that happened years later that happened to become Mystery Rummy, which
well, almost no games except for maybe Magic and a handful of other, like, you know, evergreen titles have lasted 25 years. So Mystery Rummy is among that now.
Well, in a way, it doesn't sell like those games, obviously. Never has, but it's enough for companies to be interested in continually publishing them.
While we're talking about cards, obviously I cannot avoid the elephant in the room. The hobby industry is going along, and obviously you're participating in it, playing games, reaching out, playtesting for Avalon Hill and stuff, I hear.
Yes, I was a playtester on Roadkill. I'm actually I'm on the box somewhere or something.
So you're playtesting and stuff like that. So you've got a toe in the industry, and then all of a sudden, 1993 rolls around. And significantly for collectible game history, that's where it all begins. Magic launches pretty much at Gen Con that year in 1993. So my question for you is, when did you first hear about, I guess, Magic or the collectible card game format or genre of games?
Probably the second day of Gen Con that year. I had some friends who were at Gen Con, and they brought a whole bunch back with them. So I saw it pretty quickly.
Wow.
And they're just, so you won't believe it. Everybody was running around buying every card. It was crazy. So I looked at it. I said, no, I believe it. Once I saw what it was, I was like, holy cow. So I thought to myself, first thing I thought to myself was, this is interesting, because this is something to make a mega game, to make a game much bigger than what we were thinking of about games before. But what got me to design a trading card game came the next February, when I was at Toy Fair in New York. So I always went to Toy Fair because I was in radio and I got a press pass. So I'm not a dummy. I want to see all the games that are coming out. So I have a Magic deck with me, and I'm walking down the aisle of, one of the aisles of the Toy Fair, and I hear, "Hey, you, are you with the Magic deck? Come on over here." So I went over to a booth, and I noticed it was a company in Stamford, Connecticut. It said U.S. Games, and Stuart Kaplan was the man who was calling me over, and he had a lot of questions about Magic. And he said, we're going to make a game like this, and we already have, we're inviting people who design this kind of stuff to submit designs. And do you know anybody who could design this kind of game? We could use some more submissions. And I still don't know where this came, but I said I could. That's all. I just said I could. And
it's like destiny spoke through you.
I don't know what, I was thinking about it a lot, but I had never designed a game. So I just said, yeah, I could. So he said, well, if you can get something in a month and bring it and up to Stamford, Connecticut, we have a guy named, I had 2 or 3 people, I won't mention names at this point, but 2 or 3 people who were known in the business already submitting. So I thought, well, I'll throw a game in. I don't expect that they're going to do it. And it had certain restrictions. So the game had to be based on dragons, because they're using one of their tarot deck artists to do all the art, a guy named Peter Peconic, and because he was a pretty good dragon type of artist. And so, yeah, so it took me about a week to get the core of the game. I knew I only had a month. So I started with something I knew well, which was a Stratego. And then I added in something that I also knew well, which was, some of the Magic cards that, like Giant Growth. The first Wyvern World Champion summed it up this way. He said, it's Magic with Giant Growth. But it's actually Stratego with Giant Growth. I think is a more accurate. It's not.
Yeah.
It's
well, not, Magic with Giant Growth would be Magic, right?
Yes, it would be Magic. But he was trying to be nice. I think it's certainly not. It was not a game like Magic the Gathering, which turned out to be a good thing in getting myself recognized in the business. And that's what got Richard to call me.
That is a fascinating story that Richard Garfield, the creator of the genre, thought that your work was so fantastic that he needed to single you out and come get you. But what I want to do is just step back for a minute. Let's, because you said you didn't have any game design experience, but everybody who plays a collectible card game is in a way a game designer. They're crafting the game experience that they want through building their deck. Do you have any stories from those early years of Magic? Like when you were first engaged with it, like how did you play? Like what did you do to sort of engage with that game first before Wyvern?
My buddy and I had decks that were pretty cool. I used to like Unstable Mutation was my favorite card in Magic. I love the way the state of the game changes even as that card continues. There's a changingness to it. I also did a black deck with when you could play with Black Lotuses. I had Black Lotuses, a Mox in there for black, and I had Unholy Strength. I had this in a New Jersey tournament. I had this vampire. I want to say he was like 13 or 14 strength by the time I was done with it. That might be exaggerated a little bit, but I seem to remember up there. So I played this really good player who played green. And so he put Berserk. So it couldn't have been 13. It must have been like a 10. No, 9 maybe. Because maybe it was a 9 strength. He berserks it, so he takes 18. And then he crushes me. because every card, the whole deck was putting all my cards on this vampire, basically. And I have no card draw. I have nothing left, and he's weaning me with the green weenies. And I learned a lot about Magic that day.
That's amazing. For somebody who comes in and has to design a game, obviously being aware of such a new genre of games, being aware of those little pitfalls, obviously probably helped you put together this game like Wyvern when it finally came about.
Maybe. I mean, I made some mistakes with Wyvern too. Well, no mistakes. I did a lot of things I wouldn't do today in game design. But I think it filled a space which was on the easier side than Magic, as opposed to everything else that was coming out was Magic or more complex. So it was kind of nice to have that little space for the game to do well for a while.
Wow. Okay. So, so you said there that you sort of got engaged a little bit in the competitive scene, much like you'd done with chess decades earlier. You got engaged with this sort of competitive scene with Magic. And there's some great stories there. What was obviously before Wyvern comes out and stuff like that, there's a couple of other games that are starting to trickle out, like WotC had Jihad and stuff. Did you try these other games that were starting to come out around about that time as well?
Oh yeah. Well, by that time I was working with Richard at WotC. We had, and you know, I'm a little hazy on the dates, but I know that while Wyvern was out, so it was in 1994 or 5, whenever Wyvern's official release date is, one of those. He called and said, I wanted to talk to you. And not because he thought it was the most I mean, it's not true that he just said, oh, this guy's so fantastic, we have to get him making games. It was basically to say, you know, your approach to CCGs is very different and you understand that there's a lot of different ways to make these. And we're experimenting with other ideas, and we don't want to put out just Magics. So would you be interested in coming out and talk to us about that? So I did, and we made an arrangement where I was kind of freelance. I was paid, and this was before Hasbro took over. I was paid to not do trading card games for other companies. So I could do any other game I wanted to. I was paid at the time, would be a full-time salary for a lot of people. I was paid to not do stuff. Then if they accepted one, and they would give me assignments, and if they accepted one, I'd be paid again as a designer, just what they would do with any designer.
You were almost on a retainer, a TCG retainer.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it. And, you know, I'm also a good friend of Alan Moon, and Alan and I have talked about this a lot. My start in the business was so out of whack with any kind of reality. He spent 30 years trying to work in the game business, and he was at Avalon Hill writing articles for the General, and he has a little Whitewind company he was trying to do something with, but he always wanted to stay in. And of course, for him, it hit a little later in life when he had Ticket to Ride.
Just to jump back a second, you mentioned obviously the hobby industry is metamorphosizing, a giant growthing, if you will, in this period when CCGs are coming out, because there was never a time when a company could afford to pay a retainer to a designer just to hang around and not design.
Oh, I thought it was just normal business. I was thinking, oh, this is what companies do. That's great. But yeah, but you're absolutely right. I mean, WotC was a little publisher of RPGs. When Richard went to them to get Roper Rally published, and they said, you know, we can't do a big board game. That's too expensive for us to do. But if you can make a little card game that we could play conventions while people are waiting around between RPG sessions, that'd be great. So we went home and designed Magic.
As if it's any casual thing.
Yeah.
So my question, I guess, was, as somebody who was sort of a half a foot in the industry, about to put the second foot in the industry as Wyvern's coming out, how did you see the tabletop game industry change in that sort of period between Magic releasing and everybody else catching on? So like that 93 to late 95 period, there was just an explosion of games and people in the industry. There was money influxing in the industry, like war games weren't able to source, like RPGs weren't able to source. So what did you see? How did you see the advent of collectible card games or collectible trading card games grow into in throughout the industry?
Well, it made the industry crazy. I mean, it threw normal out. I mean, first of all, distributors, it changed their lives completely. It put a lot of people into speculation, and looking back on it, I'm not sure why everyone assumed so many could be successful. I mean, the question that WotC asked right away, and their little questionnaire stuff was the right question, which is how many of these could you play at one time? Because it's going to take every dime you have and every minute of your time. So they were not sure it was the best thing in the world to have so many coming out.
Well, they've since coined the term lifestyle game for TCGs. There's been this new habit that WotC has embraced, is that every CCG or TCG is a lifestyle game, like L5R ended up becoming, or Magic is for many people still. Yeah,
it was strange because, first of all, it's a money pit, and we all saw that. It's only it was not intended to be a money pit. It was intended people would play without knowledge of the whole card system. They'd be playing in their part of the country, and they'd get a few decks and they'd fool around with it, and they'd be playing somewhere else and they'd discover another card. Again, word would get around their little community. Nobody in the company really expected that kind of sales boom. So when it happened, it's kind of like, the question was asked to Peter Atkinson. I wasn't there at this time, but I heard about this. The question was asked, what happens if this just goes crazy? Because these cards are not balanced to be in everybody's hands and in every deck. And Peter said, well, we'll probably have so much money, we won't worry about it. in a light way. But that is exactly what happened. And that's, some people say, why would you ever make a Black Lotus or something? As game designer experience happens, people look back and say, well, why would they do that? Well, it's because they didn't expect the card to be used everywhere. And of course, they had to go in then and make bans and adjustments to things in the business. And you can never, you never can test as much as will be done in the first month of a CCG release in those days, because so many people are playing, more testers than you can. So they'll find something that you missed. I mean, they absolutely will. And then you have to deal with it. You decide how big it is or not.
But I want to step back again and talk a little bit about culturally. Obviously, Richard's idea was that the rarity would help balance that game. The fact that somebody would only have one Mox or one Lotus in a play group of 20 would balance that game. So that felt safe. Little did he account for the human greed, well, not greed, but competitive nature and collectability to latch on to people in such a wide-eyed way, and such a fiscally encapturing way.
No, it was complete surprise, and I didn't know what to expect from Wyvern. I mean, it was an attempt to do an easier CCG to get into and play. It certainly is that. The art was different because only one artist did everything. I know we got pros and cons for that, but it took off, and they were ordering it left and right. Steve Jackson and I used to have a friendly argument about which one came out first. His what's that one called? The Illuminati or Wyvern, because that would have been the second. I think those would have been the second TCG ever.
As a historian, I have to tell you, unfortunately, Illuminati definitely came out first.
Okay. Well, I give it to him then. He won that. Okay. As he was mean to say, as he got into his Munchkin car after I could spend time with him.
The Munchkin-mobile.
Oh yeah, the Munchkin-mobile. He would say, yeah, I was first. Don't worry about it.
Well, he had a little head start. He sort of had that game pretty much ready to go. He just needed to make some booster packs and get going.
He had it done anyway. Yeah. He didn't have to do Klezmer.
So let's talk about Wyvern. Actually, you said that it took off. Like, it was so different to Magic, so much so that Richard Garfield, the designer of Magic, is like, there's something here. I got to talk to this guy. So tell me, how do you You said you loved classic games like Bridge, like Cribbage, and Stratego was something that you mentioned before as Mark Justice, your first world champion, very famous Magic player.
Oh, Mark, that's what his name was, and he's the one who said maybe he said Stratego with Giant Growth. I can't remember exactly, but yeah, he was the first champion.
Yeah, so Mark Justice, like he was at the time probably Magic's most prolific player, said that it was Stratego with Giant Growth. So therein it finds that you did base it a little bit on like that classic gaming, the family games almost of before. And I think that was a lot about the appeal. But what I want to know is all this is just to ask you, how did you approach designing a game which you'd never done before, a game like Wyvern?
Well, I sat at my desk. I'll never forget this. And, professionally, I had only known being a music performer for a while and going to at a music school, and then being a radio. So both those things require some detailed attention. So I certainly knew what it was like to stare at a blank piece of paper and not know what I'm going to do. And then later on, find a way, like in playing trumpet, I'm awful at first, right? And I keep practicing and practicing, and I can do something I couldn't do before. So I figure with the blank piece of paper, that's what I'm doing. So I just started writing, and I took notes, and I knew some things, right? It has to be dragons. So dragons like gold. I did I spent a day doing mythology research. So I've got all these dragon slayers from mythology, and I figure, okay, dragons like gold. So gold's going to have to be in there. It'll be some kind of cost. I didn't know what it would be. And then I'm not sure where the Stratego came. I probably could have said that once, but I had cards, and I was pretending just a regular deck of cards, and I was doing stuff. And the idea of a small tableau was what, 6? 3 and 3?
And then the areas.
And then
yep.
Yeah. So I started with that, and I said, okay, we could do Stratego. And I tried that. I basically tried, okay, if a dragon hits a terrain, what happens? And if a dragon hits a dragon, they can fight. And then the gold came in too. You got to pay for the dragon to bring him up. And which was nice because it was an inverted Magic. It's a collapsible game as opposed to and I've always had an interest in collapsible games, although I understand since I've learned they're just not as popular as engine builders. People want to build stuff.
Yeah, people want to build. People want to, people want to achieve something. They don't want to lose something.
Exactly. And here you're hanging on, just trying to outlast the other guy. So, but I thought it was interesting. So so it was just a lot of work with a paper and pencil and a deck of cards for a few days or about a week till I had a core idea. Then you go to the spreadsheet.
Yeah, so you literally shuffled up a deck of playing cards, laid them out, and sort of hatched the idea, or no pun intended, of the dragon game with that. That's amazing.
Well, I mean, my first Wyvern games were just using a deck of cards, so the higher deck count would win that battle, unless you were to have an ability on the card that said pay gold for extra strength or whatever whatever you're doing. And then I had the Dragon Slayer as sort of a direct damage that would just kill certain dragons if they were a certain level. So I thought, well, this is good. This is easy, simple. I think, and I could make a lot of cards. And I think this, it's a shot. And I didn't expect to get the gig at US Games. I didn't expect that would happen, but it started a long relationship with Stuart Kaplan.
Yeah, which obviously they ended up publishing things like the early Mystery Rummies and stuff like that.
They made more from Wyvern than they have from any other product. And he told me, Mike, just between you and me, you want something published, you can't get it done, or you're having trouble finding it, we'll publish it.
So you're literally, okay, let's just set the scene here for everybody who's watching. You are literally walking down you're literally walking down a toy fair distributor's alley holding a Magic deck. Oh my God. Good thing you weren't holding a box of Risk or something like that. Because you got offered because you got offered to make this amazing collectible card game, which a lot of people at the time called simple, but I would be more hesitant to call it simple and more to call it elegant. It was simple, but at the same time, it almost had that, like your later card games had, that family game feel, but in this collectible card game format. And I think that was part of the appeal.
I make games that I know a game's right for me to have made when it sort of speaks to me and I can't stop playing. When then I accomplished, the first goal for me, which is to make something that I'm happy with. I go through so many versions of stuff. What I learned from Richard over the years is that there's plenty of other things to look at as well, which is audience. You can change things for an audience. You can find out what most game players want, because his goal is sort of to make things same kind of initial way. He's got to like them and they're going to be fun, but he spends a lot of time making things that the gaming audience will like and play, and maybe a lot of them.
That's fantastic.
So that I tried to add looking out to the world a little bit. Otherwise, I'd be a guy, I think games would probably never get published because they'd be a little wonky and everything else. Mm-hmm. So but some of my wonkiest designs, like baseball highlights, is a very wonky design. And it took a lot of pitching. Well, it took 5 years to make it and took a lot of pitching to find.
No pun intended.
Yep, to find Eagle Gryphon. But after it came out and was doing so well, people, I've heard from almost all those people that rejected it said, that was a mistake. We made a mistake rejecting that game.
Okay, well, while we're talking about pitching games and stuff like that, let's jump back to Wyvern for a second. There is, you mentioned before that there was a couple of other very famous designers who submitted other things for Wyvern. Like, I guess Sid Saxon is probably one of the most known names, who was lucky enough to also submit a game for Wyverns, for US games as well. Did you get a chance to see his version of the game?
No, Stuart was very he was not sharing the other designs.
Right.
I don't think he was doing that with me or with other people, and it's not usual to do that anyway.
Did you think that the fact that your game had that almost stratego familiarity was one of the reasons that, rather than being a complex thing that maybe some, the designer of Acquire might make, do you think that helped US games select, what is essentially, pardon me, but an amateur designer's design, and go with that?
Maybe. I don't know. I know Stuart is more comfortable with easier games. He certainly didn't understand Magic at all, the game. So I wanted to make something that team would be able to play. So what we played when I demoed it was Dragon Hunt, which later was released, which is just a little 2-player set card game version of it. So I just played Dragon Hunt, which I had done too along the process, just saying, okay, how's this work with this? But I also made sure that there were some interesting decks possible for the hobbyists. There's the all-terrain deck, which I knew it could happen, but I didn't, I wasn't leaking anything out myself, but I saw a woman with one at a Gen Con one year. I thought that was very good. She figured that whole thing out. I don't have to have a dragon on the deck at all.
The game about dragons, it's all just land cards. That's fantastic. Well, terrain, I guess. Yeah.
And a couple of slayers just to.
And that's the great thing about CCGs, right? Like, because there is that deck building, you can put so much of yourself, be your own game designer in those CCG games. Yes. And I feel like, obviously, one of the reasons Wyvern caught on was because that was an element that you thought about.
Oh, yeah. And I think your game has to be able to do that. But the question of familiarity in the mechanics is interesting, because the thing I put on myself in every design is something I used to do this. I've modified a little bit. I used to say, I've got to do something that's never been done before in this design. I think we've reached a point where I could say that, but I'm not going to, because I just don't know all the games out there. There's just so many games coming out. It's so
of course,
and everything else.
It's a different industry.
But there's a lot to be said for using familiarity. And a couple of longtime friends have taught me that. One guy who's very well known, he runs board games for WizKids nowadays, F. Schlesinger. He was a kid at Neutral Ground in New York, and I mean a kid, when I was making Wyvern and the other CCGs for Wizard of the Coast. And he started Z-Man games to keep Shadow Fist in print, because he loved that game. And yeah, but I'll always remember Zeb is always one with my stuff. He'd say, because I'd be playtesting there, and he'd say, I like games that have all this new stuff's great, he says, and interesting mechanics, but have a little familiarity somewhere. If you can put in something that players will know, it just eases the learning how to play. And I think,
well, it's a shortcut for the mind, right? Like the
yes,
resonance of those mechanics are just like, oh, I know how this works. I get it. Teach me other things. Teach me the new stuff.
Yes, exactly. So, and I think I caught. So Wyvern definitely has that. I don't know the baseball highlights actually does. I got so far removed to make that game work. I had to get so far removed from known games, but it acts like a deck builder a little bit. It's so, people like that. So, and of course, Mystery Rummy is based on a very well-known, game system, Rummy.
Wow. Okay. Well, okay. So while we're not too far removed from Wyvern and its design process, tell me how the second part of creating a CCG worked for Wyvern and yourself. How did you play test Wyvern? How did you assure that it wasn't going to be a broken sort of environment with Black Lotus type cards going everywhere? What was that process like for you and US Games?
Well, it was me going to Neutral Ground as often as I could, because I lived in New York. So I was on the radio in New York at that time. So I had 4-hour shifts, and then I had the rest of the day. So I spent a lot of time in Neutral Ground with prototype cards. I used to just use pencil and paper for the longest time, but then I finally say, okay, I think I could safely go to a typed, a computer sort of version, and let's see how long that lasts. And that would last 2 weeks. And I'd say, oh, I got 2 weeks out of that set. Because the process is just, when it changes, and you got to be ready to change on a dime. But a lot of good people, Doug Bissonette became a very good friend of mine, and did a lot of the work for Wyvern, especially the expansions. I'd say, we'd come up with a thing together, a little group, and there's a couple of other people. Don't remember all the names, but Doug, who got a hold of me somewhat recently and see how things are going. He's living on the middle of the country, East Coast somewhere. And so, and he was good because he really cared about balance and those kind of things that I don't care that much about. In fact, I go with Peter, the guy that designed Cosmic Encounter.
It starts with O.
Anyway, his famous quote is "Balance is for wussies," and I love that quote. It's whenever somebody says, "Is this game balanced?" I said, "Why? Balance is for wussies. I'm not going to balance anything."
Well, I feel like for collectible games as well, that is so much more true, because something to make the set exciting, it needs to have those cards that seem like they're just crazy powerful in some way or another. A Black Lotus or an undercosted card or something like that. And really is sort of how Magic sells its sets nowadays, with these exciting
Well, yes.
Yeah, with these exciting super powered cards.
The Wizard of the Coast, in the days I was working with him, they had a top 10 reasons a game could be a CCG, and then they'd also have things to do as a CCG designer and not to do. And I don't think I can reveal any of that stuff. I'm just afraid to. Even all these years, somebody will show up at my door and say, "You shouldn't have done that."
Wyvern was the first CCG that really utilized the ultra rare chase cards. Like Wyvern had a silver dragon and a gold dragon that were quite literally lottery cards that had an instant money value to them, because you could send them back to US Games for like financial retribution on the games. Like there was that hunt aspect. Can you talk to me about how that came about? It was Was it a stroke of genius? Was it a fever dream? How did that happen?
It wasn't me. Well, that's all I'll tell you. It had nothing to do with me. I'm not a big fan of that stuff. I think Stewart saw the possibility to do it, and because it was a lottery, there were a lot of states that he was trying to find ways to skirt their lottery laws. And even today, there are places he couldn't do that kind of thing. So he did skirt enough, and I don't know the details of this. It was a group there that sort of said, "Well, here's what we're going to do, just so you know." Blah 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 blah. And I said, "Really? Okay." That was their business, really. So I'm not a big, it was their stroke of genius if they, because it certainly was the buzz for a while.
Yeah, it definitely was. And I saw that there was some conditions in the contest, I guess they had to classify it as, where you could just write in and it would be your name would go in the lottery. You wouldn't even need to worry about finding the card in and of itself. But it certainly has a legendary status in the Wyvern community still. The gold and the silver dragon that were worth $250 if you happen to find them together.
It's so nice to know a game like that too is still played. I'm not about to tell you there's a big tournament system or anything, but there are people here or there that I hear about, because it was a while you get them really cheap. You get a bunch of Wyvern cards for like $2 or something, and a bunch of stuff to start playing and stuff. And it was nice to hear that. I heard a lot of family play. I mean, a father who is introducing his son to CCGs and using Wyvern as the implement to do that, and he's played them all his life and that kind of stuff. That's very nice to hear that stuff, and I've heard it several times.
It really makes me so excited that there is families playing Wyvern, because we were talking before about how it was sort of based on that family game element that a lot of your card games are. And I just love the fact that this is a way to introduce, sons and daughters to the collectible card game hobby. And through these new cards. Obviously, they're not as cheap as they once were now. There's boxes that are well over their original retail now, over $100, $200, $300 now. In the last sort of 2 or 3 years, that's sort of spiked up. And then in the last year, it's sort of definitely done like a big spike in the last little bit. But nonetheless, it is fantastic to hear that Wyvern still has that life still and is still being played by families more than anything. I guess you didn't suspect that back in 1994.
No, I certainly did not.
So we were talking about the chase cards, the gold and the silver cards, which are ultra rare cards. There is a question I do have, and I don't know how much you're going to know about this. Your original CCG Wyvern and some other rare cards with magic involved. So Wyvern and Magic famously were printed in the same production factory, and there was a problem with one of the print runs. Do you want to tell the audience what that's all about?
I can tell a little bit, but Peter Atkinson is the person to really talk, because Peter, who was the head of Wizard of the Coast at the time, and the man who made sure Magic got published. So I believe it was Fallen Empire's backs, or was it Wyvern backs on Fallen Empire cards, or it was Fallen Empire backs on Wyvern cards?
So it was Wyvern backs on Fallen Empire's cards found in Wyvern starter decks.
Because his mission was to get every single one of them. And he had the resources to do that. And he'd see me at convention, and I said, "Well, I got 3 now, Richard. How many do you have?" "Oh, I'm up there now." And I want those 3 eventually. "Oh, well, okay, we'll talk at that point."
That's so hilarious. It's so rare that a CCG executive is chasing CCGs himself.
Well, it's so unusual. Cardamundi was the company at that time. There are a lot of companies now that do, big print runs of cards, but they were the first to sort of figure out from Magic how to be their printer. And then Stewart also used Cardamundi for a lot of his tarot decks. They were like the best card printer around. And so, yeah, they must have been printing on the same time at some point, and plates got put in the wrong place before they go through that printer, and voila.
You have the oddity of collectible card games of the 90s, I think. I mean, those a single card of those sell for $600-700, even a common one. So it's unbelievable what that little treasure is. It's a little kink in the hose of collectible game history that I really wanted to touch on to see if you had any perspective on it.
Yeah, I guess it was good for us in Wyvern's sense to have them be in Wyvern starter decks. I think, as you know, Magic is certainly the bigger game, and wow, a Magic card sort of in a Wyvern deck. That's cool.
Yeah, they're definitely badges of honor for collectors nowadays. So there is a few other things I want to talk about when it comes to Wyvern. You mentioned sort of a little bit before, but Wyvern, much like Magic did, started to have professional, well, not professional, but like world level tournaments. Like, do you have any memories from those times? Like, did you attend them?
Yep, I attended. I judged. I was, at all the Gen Cons since Wyvern released. I didn't get to every tournament. They had, some big tournaments in different states that I just couldn't get to because of my job. But I always took the time for Gen Con each year, and which I don't anymore. It's interesting. Gen Con got old for me after a while, and I prefer the little smaller conventions. Essen is fun. I've been to Essen a few times, so that's been fun.
So, okay. So I guess my next question is, you've got Wyvern in the market. You said that you sort of were a little bit, did you say you were a little bit more hands-off when it comes to the expansions?
A little bit. I was doing this while I had a full-time job, but the job was not an 8-hour-a-day job. Radio is, if you're on the air, you're on the air, then you go home. So, whatever my shift length was at the time, which usually was pretty short. When I ended up doing mornings near the end, it was a little tougher too, because you have to go to bed early, and I didn't have quite as much time. But I would sketch out the expansion, though. I would sketch out the name of it, like for Chameleon. Excuse me. And what was the name of the other one? It's been a while. The other expansion,
Phoenix?
Phoenix, yes. So I'd sketch out the idea, the cards, and Doug and I would work, and he had a team of testers, and we, but I would leave a lot of the testing and stuff to him. And he was really good at and making great suggestions. So I think there's one of them, I forget which, but there's one that was might have been more content that he actually did than I did. I think we put them on the box, though. I think we put his name for sure in the box, but yeah.
So that's so interesting. So the Wyvern property in 1996, I guess, is still doing pretty well for itself. Obviously, Magic's exploding off the rails, and nobody, that's got Pro Tours and stuff like that. But there is interest. At least I had read that US Games had planned on making more products within the Wyvern universe, like mini collectible games or other. Like you said, there was Dragon Hunt as well. That was another game. Yeah. Was there anything?
That still does well. Dragon Hunt still does well.
Yeah, I would love to get my hands on a copy. I actually don't have one. But is there anything that you remember that you worked on within the same universe that may not have been collectible, or another product for the Wyvern universe that didn't get released for US Games?
Yeah, there were a couple of things, but I can't go into them. Unfortunately, they're tied to other things that were published. And in some cases, there might be a question of credit, or where things happen when, and so I don't want to do that. But yeah, it was thought about. They were hoping that it was going to be a longer last, and they were trying to figure out how to keep it going. And I just said, this might be the last stop. Because then they had a print run that they ended up not being able to completely sell out. So they hit that first wall of, well, these are returnables, aren't they? And nobody wants to do that in the game publication business. So.
Well, that was one of the things that really crippled TSR, like returnable stock, right? Like, it's one of those things that you want everything to be firm sale, especially in the games industry. But okay.
Bookstores and stuff, though, are famous for returnables, and TSR did a lot of stuff with bookstores.
Yeah. It's an interesting story that same time TSR is going through this, and WotC's sniffing around the the proverbial TSR area. You can check out one of my earlier episodes with John Zinder that talks all about that.
Oh yeah, John, that's great.
Yeah. So I did want to ask, so how did you get the news that Wyvern wasn't happening anymore? Like, tell me about that. Tell me about what happened when you got the news that this game that essentially gave you your foot in the industry was going to go away. Like, how did you feel? What did you hear about? Tell me about that experience.
Well, I was so involved in making CCGs for Wizard of the Coast at that time that it really didn't mean anything to me at all. And I'd done the game. I was more than happy with how it received. And games, for the most part, are consumable products. I mean, that's how they act in the open marketplace. I'm thrilled to have a couple of games the last 20 plus years, at least just to be in print and be somewhere, or that's saying something. But it was such a huge collapse when everything just collapsed. And that was even after I had done the WotC ones, when everything sort of went down. And after the X-Men debacle. Anyway, it was just, okay, I think this is a good time for me to start doing games that aren't collectible games. So that's when I started finishing up what I had with WotC and doing Mystery Rummy, just designing it, figuring out what's next. And then when that got traction going, and it just opened up a world for me, you know.
Yeah, you went from CCG designer to game designer.
Right, exactly.
So I just want to jump in there because you mentioned Wizards of the Coast and you mentioned Richard Garfield a couple of times. So, and you mentioned being there at Wizards of the Coast when Wyvern sort of fell by the wayside. Tell me, let's jump back a little bit. Tell me about your first time meeting Richard, that infamous phone call that basically had told you that, hey, come, design games or don't design games for us. Tell me a little bit about how that came about and what it was like receiving a call from such a, I guess at the time, an legendary name in the industry.
At the time he called me, he wasn't legendary to the entire game industry yet. I mean, it was still early days. But to the people who know what's going on and see it happening, all of, like I was, he's calling me as I was very starstruck. But the first call was very nice and pleasant, and we just chatted about the fact that, like, Ultimate Combat had come out. Ultimate Combat was Magic the Gathering, card by card, it was Magic the Gathering. So they just had a different way of explaining it. It was just, I couldn't believe somebody would do that, because there is no protection, as you probably know, I'm sure, but maybe not everyone listening knows, there is no protection for a game mechanic. It's uncopyrightable. Although Magic has a trademark that they got, which, as we say in the industry, is sort of unenforceable. I mean, I'm not sure it's ever going to be enforced, but
hasn't been put to the test.
Right. I was doing something at US Games the day the letter came, because they were trying to collect from the trademark. We now have the trademark for this and that, so every game in existence that uses this or that, owes us X amount of dollars or whatever.
So just quickly for everyone listening, like you said, not everyone might know, there was in 1997 in October, I believe, there was a patent issued to Wizards of the Coast for trading card game method of play. Now, the method of play is the important part. It basically just protected Wizards of the Coast of similar games so that things like what Mike just mentioned there, Ultimate Combat, couldn't happen again. You couldn't basically just remake Magic with a different skin. It was an unusual time, but at the same time, Wizards of the Coast used this patent to ask other trading card game distributors for royalties, and some paid.
Maybe Stuart wasn't going to pay. I know that. Stuart said, "What? Are they crazy? He threw it in the garbage." I think, but yeah, he wasn't paying for that.
But go on, Mike.
So anyway, so Richard's call was very pleasant. He didn't try to hard sell me on making games, but he was sort of exploring what my ideas were, and we're going to try to see what kind of CCGs the market will bear, and answer that question: how many can one person be involved in? And we're gonna try a little bit of all that. And it might be fun if you come out and have a chat with us. So we really think, and so we hit it off. It was one of those things where you're talking to somebody who gets you, sort of.
Yeah.
And I think we certainly both felt that way from that call. And it's been a long time now. We've known each other pretty well. So I went out there, and then.
So you flew from New York to Seattle.
Seattle.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And I went out there and I met just some amazing people. I didn't even know there was the famous five. I didn't know there were five people that made Magic the Gathering together in Pennsylvania. But I met them all, and they're all uniquely special. From Scaff Elias to Bill Rose to Jim Lynn, they're very unique people.
Dave Petty, yeah.
And they have tremendous skills, all of them a little different, oriented in games. I mean, they really do. And they became very quickly, after Hasbro bought WotC, they became sort of managers of their own fortunes and stuff. They had to sort of figure out in a different way, how to navigate everything.
Wow.
One of my favorite times going out to Seattle was playing Ultimate Frisbee with them. There was this, but outside of WotC, there's this huge, there was, when it was in Renton, there's this huge lawn, and we'd all go out there, and they had little markers already sort of put in there. Okay, these are the outs and outs, and they played hard Ultimate Frisbee. This was serious stuff. And I make a good play or something, and they, oh, well, the kid from the East shows some guts here. And so that was always fun. I used to love going out with them. And then we play games. Like, we'd sit around. Richard has made a lot of variants to Hearts. And
interestingly, the people that you mentioned before, though, five, a lot of them he met through a Bridge and Hearts club.
Okay, I didn't even know that. So I didn't know that was in Pennsylvania when it was, but yes, he loves Hearts, and it's open to a lot of variants and stuff. So we were playing the Supercharge one where you put a card face up, and okay, it's a Supercharge 10, it's a Supercharge, and that. So we had a lot of fun with that. And it's funny, you had a table. I'm sitting at a table with, and I was a fourth sometimes, with Bill Rose, Mike Elliott, who is not one of the original five, but certainly prominent in the CCG stuff. So it was usually like Bill Rose, who I think is the greatest card player ever. Period. Period.
Trick taking, he is the guy.
Period. You play Bill Rose, you're seeing how to play cards. Hearts too, whatever it is. Mike Elliott, and this is a joke we have with him, and so it's okay to say this because Mike Elliott would always tell us he's the best card player. He would say it right during our games.
It sounds like that's something that Mike would say.
So we like to prove him wrong occasionally, and we do that. Yeah. So it was just a nice friendship group, and these were guys who wow, did they produce something that's amazing.
So obviously you're having this great time at Wizards of the Coast, and they have given you money and at a retainer just to not design collectible games. But eventually there is a game that you start to put together. One for a wrestling license. Nitro, WCW Nitro comes out in 1999 eventually, but obviously you were working on it a little bit before. Tell me about how you approached that. What happened? How did Nitro go from your mind to the world? Tell me all about the origin of that.
Well, this is where everything started. This is where the deal we talked about wasn't really finalized until this time. Now, Nitro came before X-Men.
Yeah.
Because Nitro started with a phone call from WWF, which is in Connecticut also. And a kid there was in product development. They said, listen, we're going to do a trading card game for WWF. Would you like to submit something? And I said, okay, sure. So I made one.
So this is a phone call to you, not to Wizards of the Coast.
This is a phone call to me from WWF. So I made the game, and I brought it in to them, and they took a look at it. And they said, this is okay, but we got a lot of people submitting, so we're going to wait till until we find the one, we see everything, and then we'll make a decision and we'll get back to you if it's yours. And I said, well, I just want to let you know, typically I get a holding fee at that point. It's not a lot, but it's just earnest money to say you are interested enough to not want me to go show it to other people. And of course, he just laughed, said, well, who else in the world would you possibly show a wrestling game to? We're the WWF. And I said, okay. So I go home, and an hour later, my phone rings, and it's Jim Lynn from Wizards of the Coast. Jim says, Mike, we just heard that you showed a game today to WWF about wrestling. And I said, yes, but how did you know? And to this day, he won't answer me. Now, I think he's just forgotten. But I still ask him when I see him, where did you find out? There are only 3 people in the room.
Well, as you said before, you're afraid of Wizards of the Coast, let's call them Men in Black Lotuses showing up at people's doors. I'm sure they had eyes everywhere.
Yeah. So anyway, he told me the story that they had just signed a major agreement with Turner, with was it TNT at that point? Turner, would he already have that? Anyway, Turner had all this stuff. So they signed this big deal on how to promote a lot of it, and part of the deal, an important part of the deal, was they had to put a wrestling game out within a certain amount of time, and it was going to be really tough for them to do that. So they said, we couldn't believe it when we heard that you had submitted something to is there anything on that? Is there any paper on that whole fee? Is there anything going on that? I said, no. They said, it was okay, but they'd wait till they receive everything. And they didn't want, I even brought up holds, and they didn't want to do it. So they said, okay, well, here's what we want to do. We want to fly to Seattle tomorrow, and we want you to bring it, and we want to sit you in a closed room, and you're going to play it with us, and then we're going to decide. And you'll either, you'll walk out of that room with a deal if it's what we need, because we need something quickly. So I fly out there. They love it. Now, they probably love it because each one of them is saying, oh, now we don't have to do all this work on a wrestling game that we thought we were going to have to do. The old team was so, but at the time I'm thinking, oh, hot stuff, aren't they? I came up with something that they liked. Because again, it used a threshold mechanic for a resource for mana, let's say. There was no tapping. Just having as much would be fine. You could play whatever you have for that. And it had the blue cards. The blue cards were cards, as you get hit with damage, you're damaging your deck. And when a blue card comes up, it damages the other person back, right in the middle of your milling.
So in Nitro, I believe that's called the thunder mechanic.
I think so, yeah. So that was an important part of the game. And in fact, years later, Mike Elliott used it in Harry Potter. And we were saying, wow, that's pretty cool. And he thanked me for coming up with it. So that was good. Anyway, so I say, sure. So in the middle of that summer, we see this ad in Scry put in there by WWF, and it's my game. It's my game. They called it Raw Deal, and it's my game. It has the blue cards. It has, a few little tweaks that maybe the guy who did it, because the company wasn't aware of this. This guy basically, so I came up with something I think is the one we should do, and they got on board and did it. So I get this call from, as you say, the Men in Black. It's sort of it was a Hasbro lawyer by this time. So he's calling me and he's saying, Mike, can we represent you in a suit against WWF? And I said, and I didn't know he was from Hasbro yet. So I just said, WWF, that's a huge organization. You're going to take them on? And Mike, we're the elephant in the room. We're Hasbro. So we are a little bigger than WWF. So I learned something that day. It was the shortest lawsuit, I think, in history. We had a discovery in Seattle. So I came out with my Franklin planners, because I used to put everything in Franklin planners. I had them all. So I was smart, because I had things like an unopened rules envelope mailed to myself and dated. So I showed them that. I showed them notes in my planner about when I came up with the blue card mechanic, when I did this and that. And the guy was there who had said the game was his game and all that kind of stuff.
Wow.
So they asked us to leave the room. They took about 5 minutes and they called us back in, and their head lawyer said, and I noticed that this person wasn't there when they came back in the room. And he just looked at my attorney, it was a Hasbro attorney, and said, "What do you want?" So they got, among other things, the rights to XFL for a trading card game. Unfortunately,
wow.
Unfortunately, I could have done a trading card game way back in those days. But anyway.
Well, you ended up getting your sports card game a lot later, but that's so interesting that there was almost that level of not admission, but sort of like that acceptance of wrongdoing, I guess. Basically, they essentially handed over to you.
Well, they basically said the person responsible is no longer with us, and they are aware of what happened now. So
did you show your game to this other party at that time, like when you were playtesting with them, or did you leave it with them and they shared it with that party as well? Like, I don't quite understand.
No, that party was there. I did leave a copy with them, so I don't know what they did with that. So I'll never know the real story, I suppose. But from what they told me, this person represented it as their game.
Right. So you can't trademark game mechanics, but you can certainly defend them before they're released.
Before they're released is the key. If they had waited till the day after Nitro was out, we couldn't have done a thing.
Wow. Okay. That's interesting. Wow.
But yeah, so that was the big skirmish with the law that happened with me. And after that same day, we went in and we signed all those things. Anyway, there's a lot going on. Again, I hazy on the order, because I know by X-Men it was all happening. But yeah, so it happens. Yeah, Hasbro was looking at everything they did, the deals, and I know they changed mind eventually and said, "We can't do this. This is silly."
So you were the first person in history to design a wrestling game. Were you a wrestling fan beforehand? There was a lot of great things in Nitro. I love the reputation mechanic, and there's a lot of other really interesting things in that game. Did you have an affection for the genre? Like, I don't know where that came from. Where did that come from? Just purely from the job?
Yes, in a way, but I was interested. It was like, that's interesting, and I don't know a lot about it. So I started watching wrestling. I went on a WCW tour, very short. I went a couple places, and I guess I'm the only person who's ever taken Goldberg down.
Pardon me?
I took Goldberg down. He has it written in his contract for a while that he couldn't lose. So they never script in that he'd lose. But they thought they'd have fun because they had something for me. So they put me in there with Goldberg and told me what to do, and he went down like a sack of potatoes. So then they award me a championship belt, which I still have, which says game designer and my name, and it's a real wrestling championship belt. I can actually wear it. I put it around. So I'm very proud of that.
I feel like that could have been the intro in and of itself.
So that's one thing that you didn't know, huh? We finally found something you didn't know.
That's something that I really didn't expect for you to tell me. I'd love to see that. That's amazing. The only WCW game designer belt.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, it was. It was fun. It was really fun time, and the game was a good game. Paul Peterson is one of the many people who worked at WotC when I did games, so we were friends. And he's, of course, he's gone on, and we intercrossed our paths intercrossed at Pokemon, which I'll explain later when you get to that.
We will talk about that later, definitely. So Paul Peterson, for people who don't know, famously famously created the AEG game Smash Up. That's sort of his big hit.
That's a big hit, and he did the Guillotine, which I think is an excellent design.
That was one of Wizards of the Coast's first like mass market family card games that, despite the fact it's about cutting off heads, could not be cuter.
Yes, no, it's fun. Yeah. So all the guys. I mean, the guys I got to know at WotC, Luke Peterschmidt was the lead of my Nitro team. In fact, he's the one who called me and said, "Did you see this ad in Scry?" And I hadn't yet. And so I think this is your game. And of course, he was right. So he started that ball rolling. But really, really good people. Of course, I know Mark Rosewater pretty well, although he wasn't involved in my team. He's always been kind of a Magic guy, but he was always there and friendly and helpful and all that. So yeah, it was a great time.
So I wanted to ask, okay, so you're at Wizards of the Coast. You've got this retainer to basically make trading card games for them. You've got Nitro come out. You've been given. Did you end up getting credit on Raw Deal or?
Yes, and when because the lawyers asked me, "What do you want? What would you like to happen?" And I said, "Well, I think the game should come out if because they felt too it'd be good if both games are out." And I'd like some credit and maybe royalties once ours is out too. I get something from them, and so they did that.
Oh, fantastic! So you're at Wizards of the Coast. You're flying back and forth. You're still doing radio work, but at the same time, you're still designing games. Then all of a sudden, you've got another game due to come out, one based on a huge Hollywood blockbuster that is so anticipated by the general public. Do you want to tell me what that is and how that came about?
Yeah, I'll tell you how it came out. Another phone call from Jim Lynn. He's the best. I just had correspondence with him because he's at Pokemon now, and I had to get something from him, and so we were back and forth. But yeah, so he called and says, "Mike, we got a problem." I says, "Oh, what's okay? Maybe I can help." "Well, we think you're the only person who can help. So here's the deal: we need a game in 6 weeks. We have to have a finished trading card game in 6 weeks."
6 weeks?
Because
wow,
they signed this huge deal with one of these movie companies that makes all kinds of movies, and one of the movies they're doing is X-Men. So that's what started, and here's the starter set.
There it is, the X-Men.
Yeah, X-Men with not opened. I've never opened this one. Has a comic book in it that I'm in. You're
featured in the comic book?
Yes, right in the middle.
Do you have a mutant power?
I think I have a few. Yes, not all good, but so they know because they know I'm quick. They know I'm efficient, and they have this belief that I do original stuff and that they're good enough to do any last minute stuff they have to do. So the one question I asked him was, "Can I use dice?" And he said yes. So I knew that would save me a lot of time, because with dice you can do things and make them happen with dice instead of cards. I mean, you can roll for things that you want to happen, and we already know what the parameters are. So it's like, it's better than having designed. Now I design cards too, but the cards could be something a little different than the cards are in normal trading card games, because I've controlled the result environment, because a 6-sided die is not a random event. You know what's coming up. It's a 1 or 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. That's it. It's one of those.
You're saying that the development period was shorter because the card game had more variance in it. Because you rolled the dice, you didn't have to, have those stringent play tests like you did with Wyvern, like WotC did with Magic the Gathering, where you test every number. Because those numbers are so variable, you don't have to be as worried about committing to specific numbers.
I just knew that dice rolling is fun for a lot of people, and that I can do stuff with this product quicker that way. And so I did. I got him a game. There are problems with the game, I think, but the big problem was, and here's something you can learn, when that if you're doing a trading card game and you have the starter decks out and they're ready, they were out by the time the movie opened, but the boosters were not. And if you do that and it lasts enough weeks, so the boosters don't come out till the movie's out of theaters, even a really good game, I don't think would catch. The boosters were just late.
Okay, so what happened with the X-Men trading card game is just saying that the movie was in the theaters, but they had the starter decks out because that's all fixed product. But then Wizards of the Coast had a delay on the booster pack product. Really the core of any trading card game is the booster pack product, and they could not
deliver that.
Can I tell you a personal story? I don't know if this stays in the original episode, but I was at a game store playing a Pokemon event in 2000, and I bought the starter deck, and I could not buy any booster packs because it was 2000, and I was at a game store. I had that starter deck. I had the one exactly you showed me, except for I didn't keep the plastic on it very long. And unfortunately, I did not stay engaged because I could not get extra characters. I couldn't get the more obscure X-Men. I couldn't get my, Iceman or anything like that from the starter deck, and I lost interest back to Pokemon, I guess.
Well, that's exactly what happened on a mass level. Now, at the same time I was designing this, I was disappointed, but hey, it was 6 weeks work, right? So
you're designing a game in 6 weeks, you said. I can't even build a deck in 6 weeks.
Well, that's, in some ways, that's harder, actually. But this, I've done a lot of trading card games. Some of them haven't been published, like the one that I was doing after this one. So Jim had said there's multiple movies in this deal. So he mentioned Spider-Man. So what I did was, after finishing this, turning it in, I said, if I want to see what happens if I take my time and work some more on it. And so I did the Spider-Man based on the same engine as I did for X-Men, but different, because you had a different storyline and different stuff. And I think that was a pretty good game. I still have that game in a complete form downstairs somewhere. But it's never been published.
Was it intended to be compatible with the X-Men game?
No.
Okay. But it kept the mechanic where you would have teams of heroes fighting a central villain, or was it different?
It was a little different. What I'm talking about with the same sort of engine is more in the what you're fighting against. The players were both fighting against the same villain instead of each other. So, and that's a little bit like what the X-Men does. So yeah. And I thought it was pretty good. And that is the last one I ever did. So I did Wyvern, I did Nitro and Raw Deal. I give myself credit, although they're really from the same game. And X-Men and Spider-Man I made, but didn't get published. So for a while, what was that? 3 that I had, the 2 Wyvern and Nitro, Raw Deal, Wyvern, X-Men. So there was a time when I had 4, and that was the most any one person had designed for a few years, until Mike Elliott decided, no, I'm going to do more than that. I don't know where he is, 10, 11 of them now. I don't know.
He's got a few. He's got Battle Spirits. He's got Duel Masters. He's got a couple of, in the Japanese market, we don't see everything he designs.
I sort of got tired of the work part of it. And as a player, I got tired of building decks.
So in the early 2000s, there was that sort of that luster lost, especially among the serious hobby gamers for collectible games. They originally were intended for college students. And by the time the mid 2000s come around, things like Pokemon and Dragon Ball Z and these younger orientated shows were aiming the TCG market a little bit more forward. Like even Wizards, who had made X-Men there, started to aim a little bit younger for their more licensed games. I just want to ask one last question about X-Men before we move away from it.
Sure.
WotC announced that in December 2000 there was going to be a second follow-up to that X-Men game. Did you do any work for that? It was called Generations. Was it something that you put any work towards, or was that just something that they had on the horizon?
They were doing that one. They had time to do it. So when they had time and it fit, it was when they would get when they would get swamped. They maybe were doing BattleTech and they were doing something else, and they were doing Star Wars or whatever. You know, sometimes they just had so many going that they had to call in the troops. It's funny because there were other people they were thinking about doing what they did with me, and one of them, who I won't mention his name, but he said, "Man, am I glad I didn't get that a couple of times to me," because he found out what their demands were. You know, in 6 weeks you got to do a trading card game. Well, that was one of those things that happened. So it was wild.
Well, do you have any comment on the Wizards of the Coast model, that those extra trading card games that they made were intended to sort of help a separate market discover trading card games and then feed them into Magic the Gathering? Do you have any comment on that?
I think that is that's a part of it, absolutely, because they were different themes, very different settings. Yes, I certainly believe that they were hoping to make Magic players more, because you know the answer to that question depends on how wealthy the respondent is to how many of these you can play at one time, right? But also how much time you have, and Magic takes a lot of time if you're going to play. So they're trying to make these ancillary products that will survive and flavor it up a little bit and possibly bring in a new audience. Yeah.
Well, it's so interesting because in the late 90s, there was the ARC system, which was essentially like a lightweight version of Magic that featured an original property by Jim Lee and Xena and Hercules that sort of helped people discover the way that Magic played. And we've always wondered whether Wizards of the Coast had intended that just translating those people they captured in the mass market to that core hobby Magic the Gathering player mindset.
I would guess. I mean, I didn't have anything to do with ARC specifically, so but I would assume that's what was happening.
Yeah. Well, okay. So there is one more collectible game, at least before that you are directly responsible for, and using the word collectible is a little bit of a stretch, but let's do it anyway.
Oh boy, here we go. I know it's coming.
You had another game, probably the only game that came in booster packs based on a food item. For US games, you released in 2000 the Pez card game. Do you want to tell me about how that came about?
Yeah, Stuart and I were talking about it. He got approached by Pez, and it's interesting because when it came out, they wouldn't sell it where Pez is for sale.
Oh, like not in candy stores?
Which we could not figure that out. They wouldn't put it on the front of a candy. It's a perfect sort of checkout item, right? Little starter pack of Pez. But they didn't do that, and so it didn't do very well. But the people at US Games loved the game, and so what that did for me was, I forget whenever Banana Split came out for US Games, because Banana Split is Pez trading card game stripped to it's no longer a trading card game or anything, but it's the game that Pez is.
The engine is Pez.
The engine is Pez. So that game has done very well. It sells in Brooklyn, New York. They sell thousands of copies for teenagers. It just became an in thing.
Wow. Okay, I did not know that.
Yep, especially with the Jewish community, because on Shabbat they were not, watching TV, playing video games, or any of that. So they'd sit around and play card games, and they love Banana Split. So that's still going on today, although it's dropped down a little bit. But that's kind of that's kind of interesting to know. And they're responsible for making the switch, but they put my name on as a designer, of course, and pay me for that. But yeah, Pez was strange, but I thought it was a fun little game.
It super was. Like, you obviously, almost a theme for your card games is that there is a family style element to them, and almost set collection or rummy style play came into play in Pez. And it was almost like a hybrid of like a family card game and a collectible element. It almost felt like the collectible element was entirely voluntary. Like, there was no fervor like there was with every other collectible card game, where there was like, you've got to have every card. This one was like, if you want to improve your game, because everybody shared the same deck, nobody had individual decks, it was an opportunity to just explore what else was possible.
Yes, and that happens now. You look at games like Ascension and stuff, which have been going for more than 10 years now, and they make these sets are just more cards you can add into your stack.
Yeah, they're sort of good. They're not called living card games because that's branded, but they're called expandable card games. And Justin Gary, my previous guest on the show, has talked about how much he loves creating new games for Ascension and loves not having to be restricted to that collectible model.
Right, I agree with him. And I love doing any game that has a defined universe. You know, when I was testing baseball highlights, there's a card in there called the Fence Crusher, who can hit 3 home runs in an at-bat. So it costs 14, I think. And one of the play tests, well, this card's broken. How can you do this in this kind of game? I says, well, he struck out by a curveball pitcher, right? Because he's a robot, and curveball pitchers strike out robots. And how many curveball pitchers do you think there are in the game? Oh, a lot of curveball pitchers. Okay, that's your answer. And how many Fence Crushers? Oh, there's just one. Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So it's like your Black Lotus, but with a weakness.
Yes. You just have to have the defense has to be cleaner, simple, and just take the big stuff away. As long as you have enough ways to do that, you're okay.
Okay, so there is one other thing I want to talk about with Pez. I had learned that there was plans, if it had been successful, to do another. Had it been available in the candy aisle, we might have seen another expansion where it had licensed cards, so you could have a Darth Vader Pez dispenser or a Tweety Bird Pez dispenser. Did you do any work on that, or was that something that ever materialized behind the scenes?
It was being discussed, and I knew about it. So I just said, well, when you get that deal signed, let me know. I was pretty skeptical that it would happen.
I would buy a box of boosters just to pull a Luke Skywalker Pez dispenser card.
I'm sure a lot of people would too, and George Lucas would have made people pay for that. So some way or another.
I mean, if I could get a Luke Skywalker and a Wile E. Coyote Pez dispenser in the same card pack, you would have my $4, sir.
Well, if you get a chance, try a banana split. I think you'll be pleased. It's that family game feel you were talking about.
I would love to. As I said, you are the true connoisseur of the card game. You know exactly what it is. So my next question, I guess, is around this time, your deal with WotC is ending and you're sort of going out on your own. You're starting to, pay less attention to the collectible element of card games. Mystery Rummy is firing on all cylinders. Wyatt Earp is out by this point. You are starting to step more feet into the full hobby game, closed card game element of your career. But before you leave, there is a couple of other little things here and there that I want to talk about. The first one that comes to mind is you were approached to do a licensed collectible card game that you turned down. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Vaguely. I was approached by Topps Company in New York, and it was a movie, and
Blair Witch
Project. That's right, Blair Witch Project. And I just said, I'm sorry, I don't see a game there.
What are you finding? Videotapes in the game? I don't understand what that game would be.
I mean, there's a couple of things, in everybody's list, or should be. Before you design a game, and you're serious about it, you want somebody to publish it. You can design a game, you don't care if it's published or not. That could be anything, right? But if you want it published, there's certain things you have to ask yourself. And one is, who are you when you're playing the game? Very important question. Who specifically are you? Are you just a mishmash who's controlling this universe or having an input, or are you an X-Men? That's what makes Marvel Champions so much fun, because you're the champion. And Marvel United, as long as you're not playing solo, you're playing a character too. So on a different, that's a simpler game, but it's the same idea. The other thing is there a game in the universe? Is there something that has tension that you could be striving for? And in Blair Witch, I just didn't see it. I think they made money on their cards. I mean, they put cards out for everything, right?
The regular trading cards, you mean?
Yeah, regular trading cards. But to put a game on that, so I turned it down. I don't know whether they had it made or whatever. That's beyond my cup. I did make a game for them though.
That I'm very curious about, and we will get there. But I do want to ask quickly, at this time, we're talking about 2002, 2003, there is a big rupture. Like, we really haven't spoken about it, but I sort of mentioned it before. There was the kid CCG was starting to come into vogue. Pokemon had exploded in a way that even Wizards of the Coast did not expect. They had estimated Pokemon would make $4 million in its first year, and it made $400 million.
Still is making that.
It still is making huge money. And as we've discussed right now, that the current environment with Pokemon cards is ridiculous. But back to 2002 or 2003, there was a schism in the industry when Wizards of the Coast, the US distributor of Pokemon, was bought by Hasbro, and then Nintendo decided that they were going to go off on their own and do their own publishing of the Pokemon game in the Western world. This is where you come in.
I'm trying. Yes, that is when I came in. I was the first one working for Pokemon USA at this particular job. Mike Elliott was doing it at WotC. What he did, he made the first starter decks, the first set theme decks. So I took over I always think about, because it was a time when he and I were the only people in the world who had ever made those set theme decks. Those aren't made in Japan. So the only ones that were made were the ones he made first, and then I took over. I did that for 13 years.
And that's what I alluded to in the intro.
And Paul Peterson is the one who took over for me. So now we have three of us: Mike Elliott, Paul Peterson, and me.
And that's why I wanted to get them all mentioned in this podcast, so we could lead to this moment. The three men who have designed every Pokemon theme deck that has ever existed in the English market are mentioned on this podcast.
That's the only place they do. Actually, it's every language outside of Japanese. So these are the worldwide theme decks. Japan doesn't sell it that way. They only sell 30 card decks in their starter decks. But and that was enjoyable because gradually that company is almost entirely made up of WotC people.
Well, you mentioned Jim Lin before.
Jim right now is head of product development. Dylan Mayo is the guy who currently supervises getting the decks. I used to send them to him. Paul's now there, so he's full-time doing this stuff. So he's doing other things too. And before Dylan, it was Jimmer Sigurdsson, who also was a WotC employee here at first. So it's like, it's just, the system just feeds that company. and so now they're not laughing at Pokemon anymore.
Well, I mean, I guess Wizards of the Coast were the ones with the experience at the time, right? They had introduced They had introduced Pokemon to the Western audiences and had the experience with what there was the expectation of, the starter deck and the theme deck and everything like that. That sort of bled into it. And that's how I first experienced Pokemon. And obviously through the Wizards of the Coast, that's how many did.
Rick Aarons asked Richard, do you know anybody who could do what Mike Elliott's been doing? And Richard said, call Mike Fitzgerald. So,
wow, I didn't realize that he was involved.
I owe that job to Richard. So, and it was great fun.
Well, I mean, I believe your first product was a Swampert and Blaziken deck.
Could be. It was in Ruby and Sapphire.
It has a very close place to my heart because I do remember buying those as they changed from Wizards to Nintendo, and by all means, I do love the work you put into them.
Well, I didn't do probably as much as you might think. What they they sent me was the entire card list, because I would make proxies of the cards, but they would tell me who the stars are. So you need this star there, and they would tell me what the makeup of the deck must be. How many commons, basics, stage 1, stage 2. We couldn't use any of the other stuff, EXs or anything else. So it was like a puzzle, and I had to figure out how to get the 2 colors in each deck. That was I think a couple of times we went away from that. Most of the time that was it. And then make something that was fun and not too much weakness. And what's the other one besides weakness? Resistance going on to make it complicated. So it was a fun puzzle. It was a fun puzzle because when I finally got 2 that worked, I would send it to them. And then, of course, those guys are amazing. I mean, Dylan Mayo and Jim Lynn playing Pokemon, playing my decks and giving me feedback was just fantastic. And they'd say, well, this doesn't work as well, so we're going to switch that guy for that guy. So they do a couple switches each time. Once, I think they said, these are perfect. You don't have to worry about anything.
Yeah. I was going to say, that's like building a car and having Michael Schumacher drive it.
I guess. Yeah. Yeah. But they knew what was going on with Pokemon. Those guys were excellent players. Dylan Mayo, I don't think this is any big secret with him. He's a pro poker player.
So he is cleared into odds. So that brings me to my next question. I have heard, and if savvy viewers go back through the episode archive, they'll tell me where I heard it. But I have heard that Pokemon, the balancing of Pokemon is a strict mathematical formula. Do you have any comment on that?
I don't know. The balancing of making the cards and what comes out, because that's done in Japan. And they are not allowed to make a card in Seattle. So there's nothing happening on that.
So after Pokemon, there was, you alluded to it before, but after Pokemon, there was the Topps game that you did do. You may not have done Blair Witch for them, but you did do another one. What was the game that you ended up publishing with Topps?
Wow, I never thought it got published.
Did you not make the Dozens game, the Wyvern brothers?
Oh, yes, I did. Yes, I did. Okay, I forgot about that one. Yes, I did. I remember that. But I made another one that didn't get published.
Oh, please tell me about that.
That's a baseball game that you could play with Topps baseball trading cards.
Wow. So you were making baseball games way back in 2003.
Yeah, but I don't remember much about Dozens, except that was it based on insulting people for some.
It was like your mama jokes, and I don't understand how there was math involved. There was some sort of CCG, TCG element to it, but it was, you basically would say your mama jokes and then somehow you'd score points.
Yeah, I really don't have much recollection of that actually happening. But the baseball one I did for them would have come out, except they were about to buy WizKids. And WizKids had a baseball clicks game that did not test well because nobody wants to put 9 guys on the field between every half inning. And it was just, but anyway, they had to go with that because they put so much money in it. So they turned down mine. But anyway, that's what happens sometimes.
So there has been a little talk recently about Hackslash, the company that revived Ophidian and has been putting a couple of games in the market as expandable games or sort of closed box games, bringing Wyvern back to the store shelves again. Do you have any comment on that or anything that you've seen from it so far?
Well, it's a good friend of mine, Jason Robinette, is with Hackslash Games, and he has spearheaded this. And once before, he spearheaded something which almost happened. We were taking some old Wyvern cards and selling them. I told him, like I'll tell you, and I don't have interest in like diving back in and trying to re-theme or do any changes particularly. But I think they could be used. You could do some, and Jason got some great ideas. So I said, listen, just do it. I don't have to be involved. I don't have to be paid. Just do it. Talk with the U.S. Games, et cetera, et cetera. So I know that's in process, and I hope it happens. I mean, at some level, it'd be nice.
It would be fantastic just to see those to see, even if it wasn't the same images, to see the Wyvern title on the shelves again. It would be fantastic. And hopefully people, now that there are so many more gamers in the world, that maybe those casual gamers would pick it up for the first time, unlike they did in the 90s. I would be so excited.
It would be fun. Yeah, it would be fun.
So basically, I want to take this opportunity to move on to the questions from the community, the ones who still play some of the games at the moment. The first person I want to call out is I want to say a very big thank you to Nick Karkerschleck. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but he definitely asked about what Hack Slash was doing with Wyvern and how Wyvern ended. But I will refer to the earlier parts of the episode there with that. Now, I did want to ask, I have a question from Craig Groff Folsom, who says, how did your years shaping CCGs and working in that environment influence your game design for later games, specifically like Baseball Highlights 2040 and even the Football Highlights game that you had as well? How did you feel that your experience from collectible games influenced those deck builders?
Big time. It made them seem so easy to do and fun to do, because all I was doing was having fun. Absolutely having fun. I had in CCG design, there's just so many concerns about what if somebody gets, what's your card limit? What if somebody gets the full limit of this rare card? What could happen? But oh my God, it's just all the time. So I think the 4 I did, or the 5, the one that never got published, that was enough for that. But I love these new formats. I mean, Donald Vaccarino, who was also at WotC, I didn't know him actually, but he was after me, I think. That would be 2 inside, I think. But he was given the green light to take the deck building idea and take it as far as he could, and he solved a lot of the problems that they were having with it. So and it really worked out big time for him, and that's a huge event to do something that now is almost a part of every game designer thinks about, can I put some deck building in here maybe? Look at Great Western Trail, look at all these games using some deck building. So
yeah, Clank or anything like that.
And it's just so much fun to do a deck builder. I really wanted to make all the sports games deck builders, but the only one that it works for, in my opinion, is baseball, because the game itself is such a short little atom that you can improve in between. The others, football became more drafting, and basketball is going to be that way too. Although the basketball game will be short and give NBA scores, which was my challenge. It was like in baseball, make a 5-minute game, give every baseball score. Well, I did it. It's like a 15-20 minute game, and it gives every basketball score. But it's not just a score generator. I mean, it's fun. You get to decide how much of a star your player is going to be, because you get to draft these upgrades and put them on these players before the first half starts and before the second half starts. So you got some action here.
So that's fantastic. So there is another community question I wanted to ask. This one is from Mosh Baum. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it's a simple yes or no question. And I think you've answered it already, but I want to just give him the respect to ask it. You yourself would not be interested in developing or designing any more elements for Wyvern?
No, I would not.
Okay, I thought that might be the case. So my next question comes from Jason Crow. He wants to know, there is a couple of cards, I don't know if you're going to know the answer to this, but there is a couple of cards in Nitro that have fan and crowd scenes in them that look like they're photos of Wizards of the Coast employees. One specifically is wearing a Legend of the Five Rings t-shirt. Do you have any comment on how those were taken? Do you know anything about that?
A little bit, but I'd have to look at the card, I mean, to remember who was in it. But yes, they did some Easter eggy stuff in that. That's pretty funny. But I tell you, nothing gets past the fans. Nothing. If there's something like that in the game, they will find it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I guess the last question is a super simple one from the community. Peter Pellier asks, X-Men's colors were red, blue, and green. Was there a reason that those colors were selected, considering comic book 4-color formats are red, blue, and yellow rather than, and black, of course, so cyan, magenta, etc. Was there a reason you went with red, blue, and green over the red, blue, and yellow option?
Don't know anything about that question at all. I have no knowledge of that. I probably had nothing to do with that. I assume the art people, the graphic people at Wizard of the Coast. My submitted prototype didn't include that kind of stuff.
So that brings us to the end of community questions. We only have one segment left, which of course is Kraken questions. That means Mike is going to choose one of these 3 booster packs with completely random questions, 3 common silly questions, and 1 rare game design question. He tells me which color to crack, and I will crack and ask him which question he likes.
You're going to crack yellow because there was a period of time when that's the only color I'd end up playing, because I'd always give people their choice of color at the table, and the one they never picked was yellow. So let's open yellow.
Yellow. All right, so we've got yellow. Let's find out what's in here right now. Sometimes they can work like your cards in your deck, and other times they can just be complete garbage. So let's find out. There you go. Yellow is there. Our first common question for yellow. I don't know if you're going to have an opinion on this. Do you have an opinion on Magic the Gathering's Commander format?
I love the format. That's what I play most of the time. Now, oh yes, because I don't have to build a deck, which I'm not up for anymore. There's tremendous variety, and you never know what's going to happen. And I think it's a genius format.
I think that is the future of Magic.
I would agree with that myself. I don't know how other people feel, but I love it. Yeah, I love Commander.
Oh, well, I don't know if you've heard, but they're going to explore Commander with, themes like Warhammer and other further properties. They're sort of expanding the Magic universe to have more involved in it.
I will wake up and watch that a little bit. Yep, I will keep my eye on that, because I do like that.
There is a lot of evolution in the Magic space right now. They will start bringing in other properties like Marvel and stuff like that, something that had never been thought of before. Yeah, so Magic might become a little bit more of the, the staple that it already is. So, what is your favorite CCG that you were not involved with professionally? And I'm going to deduct Magic from that option. Wow,
interesting question. I mean, there's one that pops to my mind right away, and that's BattleTech. Now, that was made by Richard and WotC, but I wasn't involved in it at all. But I thought the zones, in games, especially in CCGs, it's very important to have zones where you can place things and have things happen, but you can't have too many zones. And you may not know what I mean, but in that game, you can attack the deck, you can attack the mech, you can do a lot of things with zones, and they pulled it off, I thought, in a very natural way. What hurt that game was one of the later expansions. It just didn't meld. But it had a good start, and a lot of us were playing that. I'm sure there are others that I also appreciated, but that's the one that pops to my head.
Well, from what I know of that game, the last expansion introduced cards that essentially broke the game. They essentially took away the balance, much like Magic had the dual lands in the first set. This one added dual land type cards in the last set, and that broke the game, basically to shut it down.
I believe you're right.
So my third common question, last common question of the booster pack, is you have to eliminate one of these from existence. Star Wars or Star Trek?
Oh, that's great. I love these kind of questions. You got to keep one game, or you got to make this game never have existed. I love that stuff.
You go back in time, you change the timeline.
Now, are we talking from games, or are we talking from just the thing in existence?
Nope, from all of existence. The Star Wars or Star Trek disappears from existence, and Star Trek's influence on Star Wars doesn't count. Star Wars still exists as it is.
I'm going to have to eliminate Star Wars, and I know that sounds pretty major, and I'm a fan of both. But I like it's not the right word, peacefulness, but I like the pace Star Trek together, the kind of overall spirit. But I do like them both, and that's a tough question. But if I had to keep one, I'd keep Star Trek.
Okay, that's. I mean, I think a lot of people would agree with you. There is no Star Wars without Star Trek, of course. So, you know, who knows? There could have been another George Lucas a decade later or whatnot. Okay, so this is a general game design question, not necessarily about CCGs, but if you have a CCG you want to talk about, by all means, let me know. Which published game did you struggle with designing the most?
Well, that's easy. It's Baseball Highlights 2045, which took 5 years. Now, I took breaks in that 5 year. I had a mission statement. And the mission statement was, with 6 cards played, get the experience and feel that you're playing baseball and have all the scores possible, and et cetera. And to do that took leaving baseball behind. I had to leave actual baseball behind a lot. And so it was very wonky in the end, and I didn't know whether it would work, but it was like 6 different versions.
That's fascinating. Unfortunately, it looks like our time has come to an end.
I guess.
Thank you so much, Mike, for joining us. I just want to say, is there any games in particular you want to talk about right now? Things that might be coming out?
Yeah, there's a couple, baseball roll and write, a football roll and write, big detective rummy campaign game it's called, which is based on Mystery Rummy. Yep. 7 cases in 1 game the WizKids is coming out with by the end of the year. And there's other things that I'm starting on now too. So.
Okay, well, that sounds amazing. I can't wait to see this career continue now that you're designing games full time. You know, that nasty radio hasn't taken your attention away from your true goal.
Well, they were both good careers, both fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do want to just take a quick moment to thank Jason Robinette for setting this up and making this available. Thank you so much, Jason, and thank you so much, everybody, for listening. My name is Rance, and this has been the Booster Pack. Goodbye from me. Goodbye from you, Mike.
Yes, so long, everyone. It was a lot of fun.
There you go. That's the Booster Pack. Thanks so much. Keep shuffling. And there you have it. Thanks so much for joining us. That was our episode with Mike Fitzgerald. And thank you to Mike for sharing his time. If you want to support him, check out his latest offerings from Eagle Gryphon Games. That's the Baseball Highlights 2045 dice game and the Faux Diamonds card game. And be sure to keep an eye out for the latest in the Mystery Rummy series coming soon from WizKid Games. I will link them in the description when information becomes available for them, and you can check them out there. Also, if you want to find us, we are CCG History on Facebook. You can find that page, or at CCG History on Twitter. I am much more active on there. Feel free to reach out there or leave a comment below if you have any feedback, or if you have a suggestion for a TCG or CCG you want to hear the history of. Also, we are open to suggestions for Kraken questions. Let us know if you have a random silly question or a game design related question. We'll put it in a booster pack, wrap it up, and then when it gets cracked, we'll give you the credit. Also, we have a mini episode series where we will be focusing on small CCG related topics. We will usually find a guest to come on and talk about them. So if you have any suggestions for CCG related topics, I'd love to hear those as well. Okay, that's it for this episode. Again, you can find me at CCG on Twitter. That's all. And I cannot wait to bring you our very next episode. All right, bye from me. Remember, I said it once, I'll say it again. Keep shuffling.